All right, let's dive into a real cosmic mystery. We're going to be talking about a planet that might have once existed right here in our own solar system before it was, well, completely obliterated. This is the Tiamat theory, an incredible idea that tries to connect an ancient myth to a modern puzzle in the stars. So it all starts with something that seems kind of obvious once you see it. Just look at a map of our solar system. You've got Mars, and then way out there, you've got Jupiter. And in between, there's this huge empty space. Today we know it as the asteroid belt, but for centuries, astronomers stared at that gap and wondered, wait a minute, is something missing here? You've got to remember, this was long before we had fancy space probes or the Hubble telescope. We're talking about 18th century astronomers, just meticulously mapping the night sky. And to them, that giant gap between the rocky inner planets and the huge gas giants, it just felt wrong. It looked incomplete, like a piece of the puzzle had just vanished. And this timeline here shows exactly how that suspicion turned into a full-blown hunt. Get this, in 1772, a kind of mathematical formula called Bode's Law actually predicted a planet should be right there in that gap. Then, boom, 1801, they find the dwarf planet Ceres. A year later, another one. And that's when the astronomer Heinrich Olbers put forward this really dramatic idea. These aren't just space rocks. These are the pieces, the fragments of a world that was completely destroyed. So that idea of a lost planet, which some called Phaeton, it just kind of simmered for centuries. But then, in the 20th century, it got a major mythic twist. And this is where we get to the real heart of the matter, the Tiamat theory. It's an attempt to answer that cosmic riddle using a story that was written down more than 3,000 years ago. So at its core, the Tiamat theory makes this incredibly bold claim. It says the asteroid belt isn't just leftover rubble from when the solar system was being built. Nope, it's actually the debris field, the wreckage of a huge planet that once existed. And the story of how that planet was destroyed, well, proponents say it wasn't written in science books, but in the myths of ancient Mesopotamia. And the story itself, which was really popularized by the author Zecharia Sitchin, is straight out of a blockbuster movie. It goes like this. A giant rogue planet, named Nibiru, comes hurtling into our solar system. It smashes into a planet they called Tiamat, splitting it right in two. One half gets knocked into a new orbit and becomes our own planet, Earth. And the other half? It gets completely annihilated, shattering into the millions of rocks that are now the asteroid belt.
I mean, what a story, right? But is there any shred of truth to it? To figure that out, we have to kind of become detectives here. Let's treat this like a cosmic cold case and really look at the clues, the evidence that's been presented for this incredible planetary disaster.
First up, let's look at the physical evidence, the crime scene itself. I mean, if the asteroid belt is what's left of a shattered planet, you'd think there'd be a lot of stuff there, right? Enough to actually make a planet? So just how much material is actually floating around out there? And this is where the theory hits a pretty big wall. If you could magically gather up every single rock and all the dust in the entire asteroid belt, the grand total would be only about 4% of the mass of our own moon. Just 4%. That's nowhere near enough to build a planet. So right away, you have a huge problem. If a planet exploded, where did the rest of it go?
Okay, so the physical evidence is, let's say, pretty shaky. Let's move on to the second clue. This one doesn't come from a telescope. It comes from ancient clay tablets, specifically the Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish.
At the very heart of this ancient story is a battle between the primordial goddess, Tiamat, and the hero god, Marduk. And how does Marduk win? He literally splits her body in two. Now, for supporters of the Tiamat theory, this isn't just poetry. They see it as a preserved memory, a mythological account of a real, physical, cosmic collision. But this is where you get two totally different ways of reading the exact same text. The theory says this is history, just disguised as myth. But mainstream scholars who study these texts, they see something completely different. For them, the Enuma Elish is a religious and political story. It's about their main god, Marduk, bringing order to the universe by defeating chaos, which is what Tiamat represents. It's about setting up a divine pecking order, not recording planetary science. All right, let's look at our third and final clue, which brings us right back into the world of modern science. The thinking goes like this. If all the asteroids came from one single exploding planet, then couldn't you trace their orbits back to a single point in space and time? Some researchers have actually tried to do exactly that. basically hitting rewind on the solar system to find the scene of the explosion. Now, proponents of the theory have argued that these orbital models do point back to a common origin, but there are a couple of huge scientific problems with that. First, the solar system is an incredibly chaotic place. Over billions of years, gravity just scrambles everything, making it almost impossible to trace orbits back reliably. And second, and this is maybe the bigger deal, the asteroids aren't all made of the same stuff. Some are dry and rocky, others are loaded with water. That variety strongly suggests they formed in different places and got pushed together, not that they all came from one single parent planet. So if the evidence for destroyed planet just doesn't stack up, what does modern science think actually happened in that empty space? Well, the current answer is just as dramatic, believe it or not, just in a totally different way. It's not the story of a planet that died. It's the story of a planet that was never even born. It's called the Grand Tack model. The idea is that way back in the early days of our solar system, Jupiter and Saturn actually moved around a lot. They swung in toward the sun and then back out again, and their incredible gravity acted like a giant cosmic snowplow, just flinging most of the stuff between Mars and Jupiter out of the solar system entirely. This model perfectly explains why the belt has so little mass, and it explains the weird mix of different kinds of asteroids. So the conclusion is pretty clear. The asteroid belt isn't the ruins of a dead planet, it's the leftover building materials for a world that Jupiter's gravity kept from ever getting started. So where are we then? On one side, you have this incredible, compelling, ancient story. And on the other, you have the hard numbers and the mathematical models of how planets move. It really is a classic showdown, myth versus math. When we really weigh all the evidence, the tiny mass of the belt, the different types of asteroids, and how well the modern models explain everything, the verdict is pretty clear. The idea of a literal planet named Tiamat getting shattered to create the Earth and the asteroid belt is, scientifically speaking, completely unsupported. But maybe that's not quite the end of the story. Because even if the theory is literally wrong, the myth itself is still powerful. The fact that thousands of years ago people were telling stories about cosmic violence, about gods tearing each other apart to create the world, that suggests a really deep human intuition. An intuition that the universe is a violent, chaotic, and creative place, which is a truth our telescopes are only just now fully confirming. And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? The Tiamat theory might not be a factual history of a lost world, but it's a powerful reminder that for as long as we've been human, we've looked up at the sky and told stories to try and make sense of it all. And it really makes you wonder, if not a lost world, what other ancient stories, what other forgotten truths are still waiting up there for us, written in the stars?